I will defend him." The words burst out of her mouth like a flame refusing to be extinguished. Her voice trembled, but it carried a weight that shook the courtroom into silence. Every head turned toward her, the maid in her neatly pressed uniform, hands clutching a piece of paper. She had written and rewritten 100 times in the lonely nights leading up to this day. She stood there, small in stature, but with a presence that no one could ignore. The man sitting in the defendant's chair, once untouchable, now abandoned, betrayed, and stripped of dignity, looked at her with wide eyes. His lawyer had left him defenseless in the face of a storm. And yet, here she was, a maid who had no business in a courtroom, standing tall against the tide. Her lips parted again, and her voice broke through the silence. "If no one else will speak for him, I will, because I owe him my life." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, while murmurs rippled across the courtroom benches. Reporters adjusted their cameras, capturing the impossible, an African maid ready to defend a Japanese billionaire who not long ago everyone thought was beyond saving. The lawyer who had abandoned him shifted in his seat, shame-battling arrogance across his face. But the maid's gaze didn't waver. She looked at the man she had once served meals to in silence, and her heart clenched with both fear and courage. She remembered the kindness he had shown her when no one else dared. She remembered the day he had reached out with a hand when she had been drowning in despair. That memory fueled her words now. "Miss Amina," the judge's voice finally cut through the tension. "You are not a lawyer. Do you understand the gravity of what you're saying?" Amina nodded, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "I understand, Your Honor, but I also understand what it means to stay silent when you know the truth. Silence would make me a traitor. And I'd rather be laughed at, punished, or even ruined than betray the man who once saved me when no one else saw me as human." Her words made the courtroom draw a collective breath. And in that moment, the billionaire, Hiroshi Takeda, the man accused of fraud and deception, lowered his head, struggling to hold back his own tears. The abandoned lawyer scoffed under his breath. "This is ridiculous. She's just a maid. What could she possibly know about the complexities of this case?" His voice was laced with irritation, but beneath it an unease began to seep in, because he knew something that the others in the room didn't. This maid had seen things, moments that could unravel everything he had built his case upon. The reporters' pens scribbled furiously as Amina raised her head again. "What I know," she said, her voice now steady, "is that I was there when no one else was. I know the truth that hides behind money and power. I may not understand the language of laws, but I understand honesty, loyalty, and gratitude. And sometimes, Your Honor, that speaks louder than the finest arguments crafted in boardrooms." Hiroshi lifted his head, his eyes locking on hers. He had never looked so fragile, never seemed so human. His voice cracked as he whispered, Why are you doing this, Amina?" She glanced at him, and for a moment the courtroom melted away. It was just the two of them, remembering a day long past. "Because you once looked at me," she said softly, "when everyone else turned away. You treated me like I was worth something. I haven't forgotten." Gasps filled the courtroom as her words spread like wildfire. Even the judge, stern and unmoved at the start, shifted in his seat with an expression that betrayed something close to respect. The cameras zoomed in, catching every trembling word, every flicker of courage that radiated from the maid. This wasn't just a defense. This was defiance. This was the voice of someone who had lived a life of invisibility, suddenly standing in the brightest light, risking everything for the truth. And though the courtroom waited for the next move, Amina pressed on, refusing to lose the momentum she had built. "The truth," she said, gripping her paper tighter, "is that kindness does not come from wealth or status. It comes from humanity. And I will not let the world destroy the only man who showed me that." The judge raised a hand. "Enough for today. The court will reconvene tomorrow." But as the gavel struck, the murmurs didn't stop. The reporters had found their headline. The cameras had captured history. and the people who once saw Hiroshi Takeda as untouchable now saw him as something else. Human, flawed, but perhaps not the monster they had been told he was. And at the center of it all stood a maid, her uniform crisp, but her spirit blazing, willing to defy every expectation for the sake of a man everyone else had left behind. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the weight of Amina's words lingered in the air long after the judge's gavel fell. Reporters whispered frantically, exchanging notes and rushing to file their stories. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others smiled faintly, as if they had witnessed something rare and unforgettable. The cameras packed away, but the story was already alive, rippling across newsrooms and television screens. Hiroshi Takeda sat still, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the polished wooden table. His once sharp suit looked wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled. He no longer appeared as the towering billionaire people imagined. For the first time, he looked like a man cornered, exhausted, yet struck by an unexpected flame of hope. That flame was standing only a few feet away. Amina, who carefully folded the paper in her hands, her heart still pounding as though it might leap out of her chest. The lawyer who had abandoned him rose angrily from his seat, gathering his files. He muttered sharply under his breath, "You'll regret this. That maid doesn't know what she's talking about." His voice dripped with arrogance, but also with something else. Fear. Amina caught his words, her dark eyes locking on him with a defiance he didn't expect. "I may be a maid," she said softly, "but I know a liar when I hear one." The lawyer froze for just a second before storming out, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Hiroshi turned toward Amina, his voice hoarse. "Why would you do this, Amina? You've put yourself at risk. You have no reason to fight my battles." Her hands tightened around the folded paper. She breathed in deeply before answering. "Because you once fought mine." The words carried him back, years before this trial, to a night that had almost broken her. It was winter in Tokyo. Snow had fallen heavy that evening, covering the streets in white silence. Amina had been working late, cleaning in the mansion where Hiroshi hosted guests. One of the businessmen had been drunk, cruel, and entitled. His words had cut her like knives, humiliating her in front of others. She had tried to endure it silently. After all, she was only a maid. People didn't defend maids, but Hiroshi had stood up, his voice slicing through the laughter. "That will be enough," Hiroshi had said firmly, eyes narrowing. "You will not speak to her like that." The room had fallen silent. The guest had scoffed, muttered, but left. And afterward, when Amina had hidden in the kitchen, tears streaming down her cheeks, Hiroshi had come quietly. He didn't say much, just handed her a warm cup of tea and whispered, "No one deserves to be treated that way." That moment, so small to him, had been everything to her. For the first time, she felt seen, and she never forgot it. Back in the courtroom, Amina's voice broke into the memory. "You gave me dignity when no one else thought I deserved it. You didn't have to, but you did. Now it's my turn." Hiroshi lowered his head, emotion tightening his throat. His hands covered his face briefly before he looked back at her. "The truth is, Amina, they want to destroy me not because I am guilty, but because I refused to play their game, and now they've painted me into a villain. My lawyer, he abandoned me because he was offered more money to turn away. I was prepared to lose everything." His voice cracked. "But I never expected you to stand here risking everything for me." Amina placed her folded paper on the table gently. "Then let me be your voice. I know I don't have degrees or power or experience in law, but I have honesty, and sometimes honesty can break walls that lies have built for years." The next morning, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. People lined the benches, reporters filled every corner, and the cameras were ready. The judge looked weary but intrigued, knowing this case had turned into something beyond legal pages. It had become a story the world wanted to see. "Miss Amina," the judge said, Do you still wish to proceed? Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. Yes, Your Honor, I do. The prosecutor smirked. Very well. Let's see what wisdom a maid can bring us. His words dripped with sarcasm, but Amina didn't flinch. She stepped forward, clutching her memories like armor. I want to tell you what kind of man Hiroshi Takeda is, she began. Her voice carried across the room. Not from the headlines, not from the papers that call him greedy or corrupt or heartless. I want to tell you about the man who sat at a dinner table and noticed when one of his staff was hurting. I want to tell you about the man who once stopped in the rain to help me carry groceries to my tiny apartment. Even though he could have walked past without a word, I want to tell you about the man who reminded me I was not invisible in a world that tries to erase people like me. The courtroom shifted uneasily. The prosecutor rolled his eyes, but even he couldn't deny the impact her words had on the jury, whose faces softened as they listened. The judge leaned forward. Do you have evidence, Miss Amina? Something tangible to present beyond your words? Amina nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I may not have papers or contracts, but I have seen the truth with my own eyes. I was present in the room where these so-called deals were being discussed, and I know who the real manipulators are. She turned sharply, her gaze falling on the lawyer who had abandoned Hiroshi, now sitting smugly in the back row. His eyes widened as if he hadn't expected her to dare point toward him. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge struck the gavel. Order! Order in the court! Hiroshi sat frozen, staring at Amina with awe and disbelief. She was risking everything, her job, her safety, her reputation, for him. The prosecutors began whispering hurriedly, their confidence shaken. And as the noise filled the air, Amina stood alone, steady, her courage brighter than any spotlight. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Reporters leaned forward, their pens ready, the cameras blinking like watchful eyes. The prosecutor smirked again, but there was unease behind his expression. So, he said, his voice sharp, we are to believe the testimony of a maid, a woman who cleans floors and serves tea, now standing as if she were an attorney. He turned to the jury with a mocking shrug. This is nothing but a desperate performance. Amina's heart pounded, but she refused to shrink back. She met the prosecutor's gaze head-on. Call it what you like, performance, desperation, foolishness. But the truth is not owned by titles or degrees. Truth belongs to those who dare to speak it. Her words rang like steel against stone, cutting through the arrogance in the room. Hiroshi sat straighter, his eyes filled with something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. The jury leaned closer, their expressions shifting, no longer cold or detached. Something in Amina's trembling yet powerful honesty broke through the walls of doubt. The judge looked at her with curiosity. Miss Amina, what is it that you claim you saw? A hush fell. Even the sound of papers rustling ceased. Amina drew in a slow breath, clutching her folded notes, and began. I saw men in expensive suits talking about Hiroshi Takeda as if he were a pawn in their game. I saw them scheme not to protect him, but to sacrifice him, so they could save themselves. I saw the lawyer who now sits there in the back, taking bribes to walk away, to leave him defenseless. Gasps filled the room. The lawyer stood abruptly, face flushed. Lies! He shouted. Baseless lies! But Amina did not falter. If I am lying, then why did you abandon him the very moment money was offered to silence you? Why did you tell me in the hallway that people like me should never open our mouths? Did you think I would be too afraid to speak? Her voice shook now, but not with fear, with fury that had been silenced too long. The lawyer froze, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of her words. The jury looked at him with narrowed eyes, the prosecutors exchanged nervous glances, and the judge's gavel slammed down to silence the uproar. Order! For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Hiroshi, his voice low and cracked with emotion, finally spoke. She speaks the truth. Every eye turned to him. His shoulders trembled, but he did not hide. Yes, I am Hiroshi Takeda, a man of wealth, a man of business. But I am not the monster they paint me to be. I refuse to be part of corruption. I refuse to bow. And for that, I was left alone. But this woman, this maid, stood where no one else dared. She has more honor in her than the men who claim to protect justice. His voice rose, breaking free of the weight that had bound him. If you condemn me, then condemn me. But do not ignore her courage. Do not pretend her words are not the truth. The jury stirred, whispers breaking out again. The judge raised his hand, looking at Amina with something like admiration. The court will consider everything that has been said here today. This is not an ordinary trial anymore. This is about more than numbers on papers or accusations in files. It is about integrity. We will reconvene with judgment soon. The gavel struck, and the session ended. But the story did not. Outside the courtroom, crowds waited, shouting questions, snapping photos. Amina shielded her eyes from the flashing lights, clutching her apron as if it were armor. She had not set out to be a hero. She had only wanted to repay a kindness, to stand for someone who had once stood for her. But now, the world looked at her differently. Not as a maid, not as invisible, but as a voice that had shaken walls. Hiroshi walked beside her, his usually stern face softened. He leaned toward her and whispered, "You saved me, Amina, not just from the trial, from myself." She shook her head gently. "No, you saved me first. I only returned the gift." In the days that followed, the story spread far beyond the courtroom. News anchors spoke her name. Strangers sent her letters of gratitude. And though the world debated the fate of Hiroshi Takeda, one thing was clear. The courage of a maid had reminded everyone of a truth too often forgotten. Greatness is not measured by power, but by compassion. And so, when the final verdict came and Hiroshi was cleared of the worst charges, it was not the billionaire who walked out to the cheers of the crowd. It was the maid who had dared to defend him. She walked quietly, humbly, holding her head high, not because she was seeking glory, but because she had chosen courage over silence. The story ends with one line, spoken softly, yet echoing forever in the hearts of those who heard it. Sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest truth. Think of your own life. How many times have you seen someone being spoken over, ignored, or mistreated, and thought your voice wouldn't matter? Maybe it was a coworker being overlooked, maybe a friend being unfairly blamed, or maybe even a stranger being treated unkindly. Remember Amina, the maid who stood in court when no one else would? Remember that even the smallest act of courage can change everything. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Black Saga. Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of kindness and courage. And if you believe one voice can make a difference, like this video to show the world that truth still matters.